Hey everybody, Chad Wesley Smith here for Juggernaut Train Systems, joined as always by the Montana Miracle Man, Max Aita. Today we're going to talk about a very important subject in regards to squat programming and squat technique. That's going to be assessing leg strength versus back strength in the squat. So almost everybody who's training, they're going to be relatively stronger in the legs compared to the back, or the back compared to the legs. And being able to identify this and then being able to address these relative strength deficiencies is going to make your squat training much more efficient and much more effective. So one of the big misconceptions in regards to training the squat is what muscles are actually making you squat a lot.
Different phases of the squat are going to use different muscle groups. In the hole, mostly quads and glutes. Slightly above parallel, again more quads, and then your lockout, your hamstring and glutes are the ones that finish the movement. There's very little activation of the hamstring in the bottom of the squat, contrary to what a lot of people have said or posted on the internet.
So if you want to go more in depth with that, our good friend Greg Nuckols has a great article on this called Hamstrings, the Most Overrated Muscle in the Squat. So really just keep in mind as you're looking at this and looking at the way that raw powerlifters squat and weightlifters squat, that so much of the information that was popular on the internet in regards to squat training was written by geared powerlifters for geared powerlifters. And that's just a different movement. And trying to take that information, which is all, sit back, hamstrings, posterior chain, posterior chain, posterior chain, and directly apply it to raw squatting and particularly squatting to a higher or a better depth standard that you'll find in the USAPL, USPA, is going to be really difficult to do, because those maybe shallower squats are going to benefit more from hamstring strength, but actually squatting to depth is going to require much more involvement from the quads.
Well, so knowing that, we can look at differences between leg strength and back strength. When you're squatting, when you have a lifter who has stronger legs relative to their back strength, meaning that their quadriceps, the thigh muscles, are going to be stronger than their back, their low back erectors, they're going to squat differently. They're going to use their strong legs. They're going to come out of the hole a lot faster, but they're going to have a sticking point that's much higher, and it's going to stop basically immediately, almost like they ran into a wall. A great example of this is Chad's miss here at 865 pounds. You can see how he comes out of the hole really quickly and almost immediately shifts backwards slightly and misses the lift. His legs are still strong enough to move the weight, but because he's hit this point where it's difficult, he can't shift the pressure to his back because it's not strong enough to support the load in that position. So he ends up just kind of stopping, right? This is noticeable when the knees move backwards. He's trying to shift pressure somewhere else because his legs are essentially running out of their ability to push on the bar, and he tries to shift it to his back. It's not strong enough, it's not as strong as the legs, and that's the end of the movement. One thing to cue to fix this is to emphasize actively pushing back into the bar with your chest, with your upper back as you come out of the hole. This helps reinforce the position of your hips under the bar, reinforces the use of the legs under the bar, and keeps your back out of the movement more by keeping you slightly more upright.
That cue, the idea of actively pushing the back into the bar, or trying to create equal pressure with your back into the bar as your feet into the floor, please excuse my name dropping here, but was told to me by Ed Cohen. And in this video you can see that Ed does a great job of this. There's a slight moment maybe where his hips rise a bit earlier than his back. Granted, it's over 1,000 pounds at 220 body weight, but then you can see a very distinct moment in the lift where he pushes with his upper back into the bar, and it gets his hips coming back underneath him, allows him to use his legs more effectively. So particularly if you're like me, and Max has the same issue, strong legs to weak back relatively, and missing lifts when the knee shifts back and it shifts the pressure from the quads into the hamstrings and low back, you need to maximize the back strength that you have and actively use it. So it's one thing that, if you have a really strong back and you can brace hard and just set that position and hold it throughout the lift. But if you're failing and maybe the bar is rounding your upper back over a little bit, or it's allowing your hips to rise up and back, you need to be active in pushing, driving that upper back into the bar so everything can move together.
Right. And one way to do that is to devote special attention to back exercises, things that are going to be probably harder for somebody who's built more like Chad or myself. They're going to be RDLs, back raises, good mornings. These exercises target the low back, hamstrings, glutes, and they're going to be generally more challenging for people that have strong legs and a weaker back, or those types of squatters like us. Another consideration is to see the difference between your conventional deadlift and your back squat. What the discrepancy between those two is going to have a big impact.
Yeah, because to a lesser trained eye, it may be tough to look at these squats and say, well, he missed because of relatively weak back, or she missed because of relatively weak quads. So it's be helpful to go a step further and look at multiple lifts for the person. So if you have someone with a relatively high deadlift compared to their squat, they probably have a strong back compared to weaker legs. Someone with a relatively high squat, and particularly talking about high bar squatting here compared to conventional deadlifting, they probably have strong legs compared to a weak back. Obviously there would be caveats within that of someone who just has really bad proportions for the deadlift or really bad proportions for the squat. They may not have those relative strength issues. If someone's arms were this long, of course their deadlift is going to be very low, even though their back still may be very strong.
And training also plays a background too. Somebody who's trained significantly longer may have, who didn't squat very much, may have a much larger deadlift than a squat, simply because the squat's untrained. So,
or vice versa.
Right. Like myself. Yeah, if your front squat is more than your deadlift, then you probably didn't train the deadlift enough.
And even kind of the same for me. I was training all squats and bench pressing with some Olympic lifting through my shot putting career, but it wasn't until I began powerlifting at age 23 that I actually introduced any real deadlift training. So my squat was already 100 pounds ahead of the deadlift, and it's actually, that discrepancy has grown a bit since then, but that's more due to advanced body size than anything else. So moving on to the next point, weak legs versus a strong back. This is probably more common, a little bit more common in beginner lifters. As you'll see, most people have a relatively high deadlift compared to squat when they start off. If you're looking to see what a relative weak leg versus strong back squatter looks like, Kim Walford is a very good example of this, I guess. Amazing lifter, best in the world. And you can see in Kim's huge deadlift and just the way that her body is built, she has a tremendously strong back, and it shows itself in this much more bent over style of squatting where her hips rise early. Eva Januskovic, also great deadlift, still a very good squat, but you can see in her squat where her hips rise early. And I know this is something that Eva particularly is trying to address, but as you're looking to see what this looks like, those are two great examples of it to give you a better idea. As you look at a squat to assess this, if you see the knees shifting back out of the hole, the same way that it happened for the strong legs and weak back lifter, where the strong legs and weak back lifter missed, the weak legs versus strong back lifter is going to be able to kind of turn that into a good morning and finish the lift. So you're going to see their hips rise relatively fast compared to their shoulders. The knees inherently will shift back with that, and then they'll be able to grind through that lift. Of course, they're going to get to a point where they're not able to grind through that lift anymore, and that's really the problem that needs to be addressed. So if they're good morning through the sticking point, and you're able to see that hips rise slow through the middle of the lift, or if they just get stuck right in the bottom of the lift because their quads aren't strong enough to move them those first few inches out of the hole, as we're looking at this relationship, if they're missing right in the hole, that's probably going to also be very indicative of weak legs compared to a strong back. And that knee shift backwards and the hips rising is the back trying to take over in the lift. The body is trying to survive what's going on, so it's trying to shift the weight to its strongest muscles. But as we mentioned, in the real competition legal squatting below parallel, or squatting for weightlifting, the hamstring isn't really able to move the bar when you're below parallel to those first few inches above parallel. So even though you may have very strong hamstrings and a very strong back, they're not able to lift the weights in those positions because that's just not how angles of insertion and all that stuff work. So you have to develop the quad strength to be able to get out of the hole those first few inches to where your stronger muscles, hamstrings and low back, are going to be able to take over and do the work. So as we look at addressing a relative weakness of the legs compared to the back, you need to do things that eliminate the back from the exercise and allow you to address specifically on some degree of isolation the quads. And our favorite exercise for doing that is going to be the belt squat for sure, because with the weight hanging from your hips, the athlete's not able to act on the weight with their back. And so, because if they were doing that, the relationship of strong back to weak legs would continue to exist. Both of them might get stronger, but we're trying to correct the relationship. Not that we're trying to make the back weaker, we just need to bring the legs up to meet them. A leg press can be a great option there, hack squat, particularly if during hypertrophy blocks, so farther away from competition. These can be done for very, very high volumes. And while the high bar squat and the front squat are also great tools to address quad strength, you have to consider when doing those that the back can still take over. This video of Eva is a great example of that. While she's doing her front squats, you can see she hits the hole, her hips rise early, her chest collapses forward a little bit, and then her back, gets her through that sticking point to finish the lift. That's something that you want to avoid doing when trying to address specifically quad strength relative to back strength, and another reason why an exercise like a belt squat is going to be superior for a lot of people compared to front squats or high bar squats.
Again, the same thing we're doing for the lifter with weak back. We're eliminating the legs from the movement. We're not doing conventional deadlifts, because conventional deadlifts you'd be able to use your legs somewhat off the floor and basically use quads more. You're going to eliminate the loading you can put on the back. RDLs are just like belt squats, but for the back, essentially. You're able to load the erectors and the hamstrings a lot more. Same with back raises, same with good mornings. All of these exercises have basically no quadricep involvement. Same as we're talking about in the belt squat, right? So the goal is to isolate those things.
Max, what are some of your favorite loading strategies with the belt squat?
For the belt squat, a lot of times we want to do higher repetitions because it's just easier. You're not going to rig up a belt squat with 1 rep max. Sets of 8, 5, 6, 8, all the way up to 10 or 15. And then multiple sets. We're going to look towards as many as 6, 8, 10 sets total, 2 to 3 times a week, depending on the lifter, depending on their level of training.
So that's how we're going to look at assessing leg strength versus back strength in the squat. This is going to be a very important thing to do to make sure that you're maximizing your lifter's training, the efficiency of their training. To be able to identify this person has a strong leg, or strong legs compared to a weak back, or weak legs compared to a strong back, and to strategically address those relative weaknesses and correct them. So thanks for watching, and please subscribe to the channel. Get expert program design, video analysis, and guidance for powerlifting and weightlifting, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced athlete, through Team Juggernaut's online coaching. Click Learn More to sign up.